Hi everyone, my name is Brendan Vaughn. I'm editor-in-chief of Fast Company. Really delighted to be here today. Thank you, Layla, for asking me to do this. Thanks everybody for being here all day. We were going to try to keep this very up. It's the last session of the day. I know the feeling. Been there many times myself, so we're gonna do our best to kind of take this home with as much energy and insight as possible. So our topic today: AI innovation for social good. The cynical journalist in me rolls my eyes at the entire idea that AI could be used for social good. Of course it can. We know it can. We know that that's true. I say this as somebody that spent a good part of the last week playing with Sora 2, though, so please don't blame me for my take on this. I have no trouble, in spite of a lot of the hand-wringing and commentary that has been written since the new version of Sora came out, about why in the world would anybody want a social network based entirely on AI-generated video. As somebody who spent a bunch of time making my own videos and watching these, I kind of have no trouble whatsoever imagining how this could be an incredible business, because it basically costs almost nothing and is the digital equivalent of just eating bag after bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos, which are incredibly addictive and quite successful as a business as far as I can tell. So, on the other hand, to be serious for a moment, AI has incredible potential to create a more fair world, to create a more equitable world, to take a lot of the bias out of decision making of all kinds in the business world and elsewhere. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're not going to shy away from the challenges, but we're going to talk about the opportunities and the good stuff too. So Rima, let's start with you as our corporate host here. Appreciate that very much. What does innovation with integrity mean in practice when it comes to AI? Innovation with integrity is sort of your topic in this session, so take it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much. So just to start with, right before answering the question, a little bit of background about myself. I'm Rima Safari. I'm a partner at PwC and have been with the firm for over 2 decades now, and I lead our data and AI business. So I get to work with a lot of the startups. I get to work with the very large financial services firms. I lead our OpenAI relationship. So as Bhushan was saying earlier, I was with them just last week talking about the latest innovations they're still continuing to come up with. And this space is evolving at such a rapid pace. It's been really exciting. And the topic that we don't often talk about, or not enough at least, is how can we use it for social good. Everybody wants to talk about operational efficiency. They want to talk about revenue, new value streams, new revenue streams. Not enough about how will it serve humanity. So when this came up, thank you, Leila, for having me here on this topic. It was just near and dear to my heart. I'm also a mom to a 6 and a 9-year-old, and I'm a first-generation working mom in my family. So I always mention that because as a technologist and a mom, that is what defines me, right? I'm certainly passionate about that. So to coming back to your question, when we talk about AI right now, like I was saying, a lot of the conversations are about speed. It's about what are the biggest breakthroughs we're going to drive. It's about how are we going to drive those massive operational efficiencies as well, or better predictions too, and how much faster can we accelerate the speed of delivery for any of the work we're doing. Not oftentimes are we talking about integrity of it. So that almost becomes an afterthought otherwise. And one of the things we've been talking about is how do we make that a part of the entire life cycle. It's not just about intelligent AI, it's also about accountable or responsible AI, right? And how do we continue to drive that responsibility? And then I will say there are 3 key guiding principles that we've been talking about a lot in that context. The first one being, make sure you have the right people in the room that represent the audience that you're serving that are going to be using the AI tools. So oftentimes as leaders, we go back to our own teams, and you know what? Those teams all look like the same people. If it's not representing the diversity of thoughts and ideas we want the AI model to inculcate, then how are we going to build the right tools? So making sure the right people are in the room, testing it is really important. The second thing I'll say is just setting up the right safeguards throughout the life cycle. So oftentimes what we're seeing is the checks or even the bias checks become an afterthought. It's, we'll do all of this, once we build the coolest model, once we build all these applications and use cases and show innovation and creativity, we'll do a couple of checks to make sure it's responsible. And just like we do audit checks, just like we do cybersecurity tests, it can't be that way, right? It has to be in the life cycle right from the very beginning. We have to be thinking about the checks from the very beginning and saying, is it fair? Does it have any found biases already? And how are we going to change that? And then the last guiding principle I'll say here is also about having that human in the loop. And that human oversight, always making the decision and not in isolation of it. I've had several clients even now saying, hey, we're hearing that AI has become smart enough where, you know what, I can make claims decisions or we can make underwriting decisions, just as an example, right, of things. Can I do that without any human oversight? The answer is no, right? Like while the AI models can analyze all the information, they can summarize it for you, they can do all the knowledge work, you still want to have the human in the loop to ultimately make the final decision. So that's just going back to the thought of not just faster speed of AI, but also responsible, accountable AI in the context of integrity.
Certainly not going to ask you to name. Is this still on? Yeah. Otherwise, going to sit up.
How about now? There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Maybe I accidentally pushed it down. Without naming client names, of course, how would you characterize the level of commitment just in general among clients or just business people that you interact with on, again, okay, there we go. Of that step that is necessary that can easily feel, it's just one of those things that like we all know, like it can just fall by the wayside as that efficiency is being pursued, as that revenue is being pursued, where, yeah, it would be good to do this check, but like, do we really need to? Like, how would you characterize how committed, it's a tough question because it varies, I'm sure, but I'd love to just get your sense of that overall.
It varies extremely, right? So there's a huge spectrum of that. But what I'll say is that most companies have the right intent. And they do want to set up the right responsible AI governance processes in place. Sometimes they're getting so much pressure because now every board member, every C-suite member, as they're attending conferences, they're attending events, they're hearing about all these amazing things AI can do. They're getting the pressure from those events as well to say, we got to move faster, right? How can we keep going? So they'll have the right intention, set up the right governance processes, but then when it comes to the actual testing and checks, oftentimes it's like, we'll come back to it. Show me some results first. Show me how it's going to drive efficiency first. And I think that is where the more that we can set up the right systems, tools, processes in place early on, it's going to be more important. We're just not seeing as much of that yet. It's a lot more, do I have the right governance structure to prioritize the right type of use cases? Do I have a risk control framework in place? If I do, check, I'm good. But it's how are you applying those controls, right? How are you testing that framework out along the way too? That is so important.
So Andrew, let's go to you to talk about the AI hype cycle, which, as we all know, is somewhat out of control from a market standpoint. Lots of bubble talk every single day, lots of signals that every day that there are more and more of these very compelling bubble signals, and yet we continue to keep going. I would argue that there isn't really much of a hype cycle when it comes to AI for social good. As we've talked about, it's not one of the more commonly discussed things, but love to hear from you on this.
I think, firstly, I'm very confident of all, at least from a market and valuation perspective, but that doesn't mean the technology is not useful. And as I said, AI is a broad church, and so it's never been a worse time to be a problem because we've got more and more technology that we can use to fix a problem. But tech companies have a history of looking at social problems and going, what this social problem needs is more technology. And that is rarely the solution to a people problem.
A cynic might say, create the problem, sell the solution.
Yes, well, that would be very cynical. And as a Brit,
I'm referring to myself as a cynic. I'm really not that cynical. I'm very pro-tech, actually. But
ditto. And LLMs like AskDial can be positive to do things like democratize information. They can act as a knowledgeable librarian which can point you to sources of truth. But democratize is the wrong word, I think, because they're not democracies. They're models which have been created by nation states or tech companies who have, as we heard earlier, requirements to do return on capital, and they've got to navigate their own political landscapes, and so on. So I'm not entirely sure whether or not, and earlier there was that gap between the haves and the have-nots. So LLMs can be useful and can give ideas and prompt access to things. But more generally, as Rima was just saying, the problem with machine learning more generally and AI more generally is it can further embed systemic biases that we've already got. Just because we can make the same bad decisions quicker doesn't mean that we've solved any problems. So I think the challenge there is for companies to take a step back, look at the decisions they've made in the past with the human in the loop or the centaur type model, to really then look at making better decisions which have greater social impact, but also, as we heard earlier, better business outcomes. So it's not one or the other. You're doing more fair lending, and that's good for society. So in terms of the hype cycle, I think ultimately joy is still out. It's definitely hyped overall as a technology, but for social impact, I'm not sure. But I do know that social impact, in my opinion, starts with small changes and they mount up. And so I think the best example of social impact from AI has been in around accessibility. So whether it's speech to text or text to speech, which is more accessible to people with disabilities. And in the UK, there was a story recently, just in August, I'll get the name right, Sarah Ezekiel, who lost her voice to ALS, motor neuron disease, in about 25 years ago. 11 Labs has now cloned her voice, so she no longer sounds like Stephen Hawking. They found 8 seconds of scratchy audio in an old VHS, and now she speaks with her own voice. And that's social impact.
That is great. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah. You ended on a positive note there, which I appreciate, because I was going to go to Brandon next, actually, and then James will come back to you to kind of bring it back down to the challenges and the apparent uncontrollability of AI, and get you to speak to that. But Brandon, let's start with you, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself first. I should have done that with Rima. Apologies for that. Where do you see AI driving the most meaningful impact today? What are some other sort of good examples of what we're talking about?
Wonderful. Hi everybody, I'm Brandon. Welcome to the last session. Thank you for being here. Jaded Millennial first, so Desiree's, I don't know if Desiree's still here, but I'm in that club. First half of my career I was in HR. Second half of my career I'm in marketing. So I care a lot about marketing to employees and leadership and internal comms and selling internally. And that is why I think in answering the question, one of the biggest and most powerful tools we as humans still have is storytelling, which is what my friend Andrew just ended on, and now you went, aw, that's amazing, right? Storytelling won't go away. And right now what we're doing, in V1 of generative content, generative AI, is we're going to these models and just saying, make me sound succinct, make me sound more strategic, make me sound nicer, right? How do I say, please see previous email in a more gentle way, right? But what we're missing is something called contextual empathy. And does anyone know what I mean by that, contextual empathy? Understanding people and how they understand the world. I'll say it again, understanding people and how they understand the world, AKA show me you know me. So the most powerful tool you have in your storytelling toolbox tends to be something called metaphor, right? Metaphor storytelling. So for example, one-on-one, if I'm giving a presentation or speaking in a performance review to an employee, and I use a sports metaphor like a lot of people tend to do, you have no idea what I'm talking about. And I say, we need to move the ball down the field, we need more at-bats. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about, right? You're right, it's gonna miss. But if you really get to know me, whether it's through fun facts or really understanding me or talking to me, and you bring in that metaphorical storytelling, and it's something I understand, contextually and empathetic, I'm a musician, and I will prove to you I'm wearing piano socks, okay? Right? I had mentors who had told me, hey, you're in a little heavy metal in these meetings, you gotta play more jazz, right? Right? You gotta take more breaks, be comfortable with the silence. And I was like, oh, okay, there we go. You're playing in 3/4, you gotta play in 4/4, right? But if you said, we gotta get more tackles, I'd think, what are you talking about, right? So contextual empathy, I think, and prompting these things in the right way in a personalized sense will get us to affect people one-on-one. And then I'll tell you a really quick story about how that affects teams and how powerful metaphors are. So my favorite story I tell is called Swan Towels. It's my first job out of college when I was in HR, I was in recruitment, because I thought this is the storytelling of the organization. Employer brand, experience sales. I get to learn sales, but I get to learn storytelling. And so I was recruiting for a hospital and healthcare network in the environmental services department, which I think a lot of you know what that is, right? It's a fancy schmancy way of saying the janitorial staff. So I was like, wow, okay, I get to recruit janitors. That's, okay, here we go. But I will tell you, cut to our president of the hospital reading out the CSATs, or the customer satisfaction surveys, and all of the stuff that we pay millions of dollars for, the robots, the doctors, just table stakes. Satisfactory, yep, you have it. And in the free form box, several comments came back and people went, oh my God, but those towels that you folded into animals and swans, it made me feel like instead of being in a hospital, I was on a cruise ship or a vacation, right? And so if you come to a team and you just go, yeah, we hit our OKRs, and we cleaned the rooms on time, I hired the staff that did that, right? But if you use metaphorical storytelling, you get to move a team like that. Like, you are not just doing your job, you're change makers. Like, you're literally showing up and being the differentiator, between this hospital and that hospital. Metaphors are ultra powerful. So when it comes to, where I see it going, it comes back to personalization, but it comes back to humans prompting how to be better storytellers by way of getting to know their people and telling their people in the way they would understand and contextualize the world.
So I love that contextual empathy, and that is fascinating, that idea, because you see people that stand up and they use metaphors from a completely different world. You can watch some of the people in the room really getting it and their eyes light up, other people just going, like you said, what are you talking about with the sports metaphors? How does AI help with that, though?
Yeah, so AI is gonna help you basically be a sparring partner, be able to actually have like a comms coach. And so this is going to be automation at scale for you to go, hey, before I just go out and I just all generatively put together a PowerPoint and then go, so you get it, right? It's the aggregation of our fun facts, It's actually going to help you contextualize things and practice communication skills. So I think it's actually going to be, your comms partner. Because a lot of companies have the blessings of having comms partners, but a lot just have that one comms department with 2 people in it, right? And it's the all company town hall, the all company metaphor, right? We're moving the boat, we're moving the ship, we're doing the football thing, right? You get to have a one-on-one comms partner, and I think that's gonna be inclusion at scale.
I want you in the game on 4th and inches. So, James, let's talk a little bit about controlling AI, which can feel impossible. It's not, and the reason I am confident that it's not is that I used to think that social media was unstoppable, and in many ways, of course, it is. But we have seen in recent years one prominent public intellectual who I actually had the privilege of interviewing recently at a Fast Company event is Jonathan Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation, and what he has been able to accomplish with getting smartphones out of schools in, I think, half of the US states, with many more states considering similar legislation. In New York, it's going kind of shockingly well. A lot of the kids are like, this is great. As long as no one has a phone, I'm okay with me not having a phone, right? During these hours. So these things are reversible even when they don't seem like they are, or that big tech is just too powerful to rein in any way. So how is this going to play out with AI? Where do you see the opportunities to kind of affect positive change, and maybe where do you see the biggest challenges to doing so?
So I think it's there are 2 ways to look at it. Well, first, hi everybody, I'm James and Felton. I'm losing my voice, and Keith. I have a lot of first names, but I'm trying to put on a suit to make sure I don't come across as a serial killer because I have 2 first names. I would not get it. I'm running for Congress here in Harlem, uptown. Thank you. I don't think they're doing it. I've been yelling and drinking and all that. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But before I got back into politics, and I'll just say, like, we were using AI earlier today. We were canvassing in East Harlem, and we came across me and Ali Dini over there in the back of the room, a couple of what we believe to be Chinese speakers, and we had only created literature about housing policy for Spanish and English speakers. And we did not know how to communicate with these people. They were giving us a lot of data that they weren't sure we were asking for because they thought we were the registration desk for community carding. Anyway, so like AI is all around us. People are using it to translate things. But before I was a politician, or I guess still right now, I was an engineer, I was an economist, and I sort of danced between two worlds, both regulation and insurance. Shout out to some of the insurance people in the room. And as the economist in the room, I would say we have to create adequate incentives to control AI. So there's what, Rima talked about, which I like around, this sort of integrity by design. And we can do that through standards like this standard on my lapel pin is the standard for DEI. It's the ISO 30415 standard for DEI. We have codified what we think it means to be deliberately inclusive in any of your organizations, which is something I think people thought that we could not do. And it's very similar to the ISO standard for cybersecurity or IT or you name it. We can design in what intentionality, what integrity, what inclusion mean, all the I words, but I think we have to have, and I didn't know this was gonna end on an I, this is just kind of a freestyle, is we have to have the adequate incentives. And I think that the way that we do that in this country is by creating a legal incentive for insurance to adjacent or parallel, I should say, to the regulatory regime, increase the price of bad actors who are not implementing AI with integrity by design, which might incentivize, PwC stock price to go up because I have to hire them to teach you how to do it, and hopefully maybe you all hire my firm. But it's the Zurichs and the Chubbs and the Lloyds of the world who will incentivize that. And so by incentive, I'm talking about legal risk, right? And I think in order to have legal risk, like I just got back from Helsinki, Copenhagen. I was in Denmark, Finland, and Estonia last week. If you're not familiar, well, not Denmark, but the other two countries have the longest border with Russia. Everyone over there is terrified by what's happening here. But what they did in the broader EU, minus the UK, shout out to Layla, in the post-Brexit UK, we celebrated a law that we got passed in Denmark, which gave people IP, intellectual property, rights over their voices, their faces, and their bodies. Now, I'm a labor economist by trade, and so I know that I can use that to make a more formidable negotiation around if you do take in my data, like you think about an idea as a product, because our digital lives are not separate from our lives anymore. And whether this property is intellectual or something more nescient, we don't have the right words for it yet, it is still property. And if you are a piece of my supply chain of something that is valuable, I can at least argue that you owe me some money. And per that capital that I can argue for and the potential harm on my property, like we would argue about harms of any other property that we have, I can create adequate legal risk for the insurance companies. I know one insurance person in the room, so I keep looking over at her. So I think about insurance, incentivizing the auditors and assurance people of the world to create a parallel incentive to the regulatory regime. The difference between us and the Europeans is we usually litigate and they regulate. They usually start first. Every big change moment, I think if we look at the world as a cyclical series of change moments, it's taken about 30 years where Europeans usually regulate first. And the Europeans usually mad at the regulation because it's not really implementable. Then we come back over here and we kind of mimic that reg based on Europeans in our courts, and then we argue about it for a fee. Then they audit and change the reg, and then we adopt it, and this is about the 25th year, so we're only a good 15 years, and so we're still early. We're still about 5 years from whenever we will give everyone data rights here. But when we do that, politicians like me will argue that you are owed for your input to the insatiable machine that is all around us, creating our autonomous, productive lives. And the world does owe me some money for being, I live in Harlem, I'm cooler than all of you combined. And the world owes me for being cool. I was on campus when Mark Zuckerberg was automating Facebook to get a girlfriend. They were at our frat parties. It was a real thing. This is like not make believe. I was Tyrone in Boston, and Cambridge as well. So the point is, I think that we can both create a regulatory regime, and we've done that not only through Denmark, but the EU has just passed a Data Act and an AI Act that empowered this one law out of Denmark and basically distribute it everywhere. So you'll start to see union arguments around what people are owed, number one, and then people will take that individual right about their new property. And then we'll have at least one of them, some Parisian taking in a Broadway show, and we'll claim, I will claim, I mean me in particular, it'll be in the news. And I felt like she was done wrong, and you owe her some money. Because I want to set that fire so that insurance and assurance can sell more fire extinguishers and give us an incentive to implement AI with integrity. Because right now we just don't have the incentive to do it. I've run a startup. When we think about little companies, they just don't have enough incentive to go through all the regulatory checks and balances. I think the new interesting thing that will be an interesting space that we'll be in is trying to consider if new, young, innovative companies are going to be allowed to innovate on their own without a big brother, big sister company that can afford to overlay this sort of integrity. And I'm thinking about things like a SOC 2. If you ask a tech startup to give you a SOC 2, for anyone who knows what that means, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, that's fine. You don't need to know. But asking a firm to do that is it's a heavy lift, right?
Yeah.
And you can't afford it, so you find workarounds. It forces you to innovate more. But in the AI era, that innovation can be a lot more dangerous. You basically mining more me's, at which point I will sue you because you owe me some money. And I just made Midtown interesting. So.
Vote for me, I'm cooler than you. It's a new slogan. I mean, why not? I like it. Andrew, let's go back to you to talk about the CTO's role in AI for social good. Hiring is one obvious thing that comes to mind when you think about what companies and specifically CTOs can do to remove biases, use AI to remove biases in that very important process. But I don't want to limit it to that. Are there other areas where you think there's a lot of promise?
I'm going to start with the negatives, and hopefully by the end of my freestyling I get to a positive. I think the role of the CTO is really to bridge technology in the business. So it's to understand the technology and to understand the business and explain one to the other in both directions. And that's across the business, internally and externally. And hiring is a good example. We have had this year 1,600 applicants for 5 graduate positions. And all of those CVs have been gone through manually, by hand, by a human.
And I mean, isn't that, sorry to interrupt, but isn't that also just a function of technology? It's gotten so much easier, LinkedIn's made it so much easier to apply.
And
it's a nightmare for HR.
We're now seeing automated AI, agentic-driven applications, which is this year just going to make it even go higher. So some of the people on the ground who've been reviewing the CVs, relatively inexperienced HR people, are like, AI is the solution. What we should do is get an AI solution in, and it can review all the CVs. And I am very glad that I am not the only voice on the company leadership team. Our talent acquisition head, our chief people officer, our head of HR, and I are all on the same page of going, maybe not. Maybe. I'm not disputing that the pattern recognition that a human does can't be done by an AI, but that I'm not just going to turn it on. And so, as a CTO, I can understand the limits of the technology. I can echo it back to the business function, in this case HR, and I can also understand things like usability and so on, and usability testing. So my condition before we start using that technology is me, the chief people officer, the talent acquisition manager, the head of HR, and the people who've been doing the CV review all go through the process that they're proposing with AI-based interviews and so on, so we can see what the experience is like. Is it a good experience? Is it good for our employer brand and things like that? And do we pass? Because if we don't, then I think we're all pretty much worthy of our jobs, and so the technology doesn't work. And that kind of testing mindset is probably something that a CTO can bring to any rollout of AI across the business.
Rima, would love to have you jump in here and talk about kind of what, I'd love to just hear, like, is there a standout example from your clients that really strikes you as something that is really inspired, really creative, replicable potentially by other people using this new technology for something that is beyond just the things we talked about. You mentioned earlier, productivity, efficiency, even creativity.
Absolutely. I will say 90% of the ones we come across, I'll break that apart, right? Actually, 70% are probably all about operational efficiency. Another 20% are about how could we drive growth? How could we leverage AI for new products, right? How could we monetize our data for it? So that covers your 90%. Then we talk about the 10% that do come up that are like, can we use this to serve humanity better, right? What could we do differently? And one such example has been in the mortgage lending space. And in terms of saying, as applications come in, how do we make sure that we're setting up the right checks so that we don't have the same biases that we had before? Because oftentimes any of these processes are based on historic data, right? So they're based on patterns of how decisions were made by humans at that time in the past. And if you just look at that historic data, you feed that in, you use AI to make new decisions based on that, guess what? The same biases are going to carry forward, right? Which is why I said the people in the room have to be different. The people in the room have to represent the diverse voices of the audiences that they are serving. And that was one such example where I thought it was different from the usual ones that I often come across, which is either contact center operations or so. The only other one that I'll bring up, right, is every time somebody is going through a difficult life moment, say they have to, they had an accident or they're about to have a baby, right? It's something that requires a sense of empathy. In the past, we would say you have to have a human conversation for it. So it would lead to a lot of traffic in the contact centers. And people started saying, oh, let's build chatbots, right, for it. I think we've all gone through examples where you're trying to talk to a chatbot and you're just frustrated. You're just like, can I just talk to a human? Like, agent.
Representative!
But I think now we are getting to a point where the AI models are getting smart enough to understand intent, where you don't have to code in every intent and what should be the response to it beforehand. It's understanding that, you know what, this customer is really upset, they need to be transferred to a representative that can talk to them. It's also starting to show empathy as well in the conversation. So from a standpoint of how can we be there for the customer in their time of need at any given point of time? Because you know what, AI doesn't get tired. AI is not going to bed at night, right? So it's available 24/7. It's available in every language. So if somebody started speaking in English and then Spanish was their native language, and if they were really upset, they just broke out in Spanish. Guess what? The AI agent can still respond to that in Spanish. It could understand it instantly, right? So those are some examples where I'm seeing it more for social good to improve the human experiences as opposed to the traditional operational efficiency areas.
That's great. I love the mortgage example. It's such a good one. This country has obviously a terrible history with unfairness in that area that continues to this day, and so that is a huge challenge that hopefully AI can fix. I want to do one more, and then let's have some questions. Brandon, I'm going to come back to you. As this sort of storyteller on the panel, how would you characterize the biggest challenges to sort of scaling this idea of AI for social good and sort of using storytelling and the power of persuasion to get companies and then individual executives within companies to overcome some of these natural and frankly understandable hurdles with, like, if you're a CEO and your board is saying to you, yeah, nice AI strategy, where's the ROI? That is going to be a lot of people's priority, especially since the kind of honeymoon is over, where it was just like, here's a bunch of money that I'm going to throw at AI so that we can say, here's our cool AI strategy, get our stock price up or whatever. Now it's the rubber meets the road, what's the ROI? So how do we use storytelling to keep social good in the conversation?
Wow, yeah. That's the biggest question everybody wants to know. I think, what's interesting is, like, you could tell everybody the story, show them the case studies, but it's only till the executives feel like the really deep cuts and effects of swinging the pendulum and the oscillation to the like extreme other side that you're kind of seeing happen already, right? You can read about like Klarna, right? You know, they cut all the customer service. Oh wait,
Yeah.
people need to talk to customers.
Duolingo,
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. What do you know, right? So I think you're starting to see like the front runners of, hey, if we just go extreme, like, you know, pull the lever, take all the humans out, what happens, right? Then the second mover advantage happens, where you start to say, okay, for the companies that are saying, hey, we can do more with more, that's great, right? We need you, and you can go faster, and it's on your phone, and you don't have to come to the office, so you can skip working, you know, you can work through your commute, and now they're exhausted, which is something, where is it Sean talked about, right? We're all exhausted, right? So now we're on the third wave of, okay, like we need humans, but you're really, really tired, you know? What are we gonna do with you? Well, we have to like reignite you with being passionate for your craft and having a tool that makes you better at your craft. Because what I'm seeing, I'm not trying to end on a negative note, but what I'm seeing right now is that a lot of people are going, okay, they know they need me, and they know they're giving me these tools, but they're telling me to use tools that take away the best part of me, like my love for the craft, right? I'm generating this so-called AI slop, but I'm an artist, right? Like I want to take time with this. I want it to be really, really good. So I don't know if it's going to be, you know, a lot of just like small bubbles bursting for them to say like, hey, how do we dial in more with more without exhausting, without taking the craft away from people who love to do it? The story is almost like the inverse, right? Showing them like the ill effects of what could happen to get to the, you know, the onion layer of like, okay, AI is not going to save the world. It's going to make us transform in a way we haven't seen in a long time. It's not going to replace us. It's not going to make us do more with more at like 200 miles per hour. But what it is going to do is help us up-level certain skills that you may have heard this metaphor that I've heard some people use, which is it kind of dilutes itself to the most average, you know, sort of like employee that you might have, or you know, the most basic level, right? So that's something that can help you with mundane tasks, right? So what it's going to do is show ROI, and like I didn't have to do all this insane like reporting and bookkeeping and nonsense that I'm like, I want to go do this thing. Or if you're a strategic person, you know, all the stuff that like I'm not really good at comms or creating, you know, I have a creative sparring partner now, you know, so it's gonna finally prove ROI in areas that where everybody, you know, was like, hey, I bring this certain skill to the team. I don't want to learn and do these other things. Why? I kick with my left foot. Let me kick with my left foot. To use a sports metaphor, right? Messi only ever kicked with his left foot, right? And they were like, why doesn't he kick with his right? He's one of the greatest of all time, right? But I think what you're going to see in the proving the ROI is like find where people can admittedly say, I don't like to do it. I'm not good at it. It's a waste of time. Great. Let's, you know, find free space in your day to do what you're really good at. Automate the other things. And actually be realistic, getting back to an individual level. Let's find by person, by department. Again, I think someone was talking about linkages. I don't think he's here anymore, but yeah, like they mapped from Alexander Mann. You mapped out every part. What is truly human? What is truly, you know, human plus AI? What is truly, you know, advanced AI? And until you do that, then you can't just go, hey, I told everyone to use AI. Is it working? What's working? Where are we going? What are we doing? Yeah.
All right, let's have some questions. I think, do we have somebody with a mic? Maybe we don't need it, but go ahead.
Hi, thank you, great panel. I worked at a venture-backed AI company my last role, and one of the things we struggled with, because we actually took public information, different languages, different modes from all over the world, and turned those into real-time alerts for breaking events. And we were in a quandary about, are we going to bid on an FBI, you know, RFP for our solution? Because this would help, say, the police, and now in the current world, ICE find that next protest. But it also helps protesters find the people they need to find in real time too. So I guess what another thing we struggled with is investors like it, including venture capitalists, that the less people you have involved in the technology, you know, that will supposedly increase your valuation, and that's what they wanted to focus on. But we needed domain experts, as we call them. Again, these are rules that did not, you know, even exist, you know, 10, 15 years ago, to help QA what the algorithms were spitting out. And I just would love to just have any of you comment on the tensions between what investors see as value with the humans in or not involved, as well as who will be able to use the power of your tool and for what?
I don't mind going for the first half, you can do the hard bit on the
Sure,
second
sure.
bit. So we're a public company, we've got investors, fortunately I don't have to do a lot of the investor relations, but I get trotted out occasionally to talk tech and show that we know what we're talking about. But there's definitely a pressure, and maybe it's once better share of a drink, but well, chatting house rules. As I said earlier, I think we're in a bubble from a investor perspective and a market perspective, and those investors are incentivized to keep that bubble going. So that pressure on you need to do more AI, because if you stop doing AI, then that bubble is going to deflate or it's going to pop. So shove AI into everything, because that's the way the bubble carries on going. That's the tension with investors. If you've got I'm going to speak from the position of a mature software company. So we have customers who we make money by selling them solutions to their business problems. Sometimes that involves AI, sometimes it doesn't. And we can point to our track record and say, yes, it's great that you want us to go and put some shiny AI in, and we've got all these cool things that we can do with it, but right now we're focusing on this market expansion over here and this market expansion over here, which will give us actual demonstrable ROI, and that's in our shareholders' best interest right now.
Yeah, I would just add, look, I think this incentive to, build whatever tech can possibly exist is kind of innate to our existence. Since our oldest technology, since language, wheels and fire, if we call it our oldest methodology, hardware and software, we're always snowballing this. So either your company's going to build the tech because there's adequate incentive to, or someone else is. I think what we have to remember, though, again, per the broader, at least financial incentives, is that 90% of the S&P 500 claim that more than 90% of their balance sheets right now is human capital. In 1975, it was less than 17%. So that's the real reason that we won't just get rid of people working at companies. It will be diverse groups of people thinking about product deployments and making sure we'll just be watching the tech, which is kind of what we all do right now. I bet all of your hands are soft and smooth if I, shake your hand right now. I mean, it looks like a lot of lotion people. But the point is, that's going to happen. I think I would advocate for, even as the company, right, for more regulation on rights of abuses of power, right? Our most singular through line through how we exist per people who create companies and just individuals existing in society is individual agency. Individual agency is our new ethos right now. It didn't used to be like that 100 years ago. And at the point that your tech violates any individual's agency, you, your CEO, your investors, even though they probably won't because they're not incentivized to, should be adequate advocates for that individual's agency. But in order to keep the broader value pool of all the companies that we work for, we all work for the S&P. Whether we like it or not, you probably work for a supplier of one of those 500 firms. If that value is what we trust that it is because we believe people have value, right, then you'll invest in us being able to enforce individual agency. And if your founders, or if you're one of them, or your PE firm that deals with you all is against that, it will ride outside of their building until ICE shows up. So.
By the way, I live in your district in Harlem. I hope that makes me cool.
I like the color. I like the shirt.
Gentleman in the back.
Real quick, like a 30-second response, because
Yes.
we do have to get reflections of drink. There's been different regulatory responses across both sides of the pond. Let's keep this like to Europe and US.
Sure.
Privacy, EU Act, AI Act, cozying up to our president, through the tech leaders. What's right and where does it all end?
There's only one right answer. It's the one I'm about to give you right now. It's the same thing I told the Danes in 2017. I spoke at it was like the 100th year anniversary of their Insurance Companies Trade Association. The Prime Minister was there and I was like, you have to do this. And they would talk, the conference was called Data Ethic. I'm assuming that means ethics. I only speak this version of English. And they were talking about privacy, right? Privacy. right? I think it's not a thing if I can't enforce it, right? My privacy is not my own unless I can enforce harm. So the only answer is we have to give this sort of ownership, right? I use the word ownership and like, this is too American. It's like, without ownership, like, we have nothing. If we cannot distribute it more broadly and then go to, you know, legal odds with each other until we have a general consensus in case law about what we mean, we're screwed. So either we will stand up for our neighbor's individual agency, or we'll all be running the streets. I'm probably gonna win a lot of these street fights though, if I look around. So, but not all of them, after like 12 of y'all.
I have
I think we have time for one more
It's just a
here.
yes or no question.
Okay.
And you can elaborate later on, but it's just yes or no. You're smarter than most of the audience. Most of the panels have asked this question to. So, yes or no across the panel. Can we use AI to ask AI where their bias is? Can we ask AI, well, how did you come up with this answer, and what were the things that you thought about to actually pinpoint and identify where the bias actually creeped in? I pushed him.
I've got a 5-word answer. It's a 5-word answer.
Next.
You can ask an AI about another AI. You can't ask an AI about itself. It doesn't have thinking.
I would say yes. I would say it will, but the thing is, it's always trying its best to please you. So it's still going to give you an answer that you want to hear. It'll come up with a list of biases that it thinks it had, may not be complete or accurate.
Yeah, I would just add to that answer, I think that's correct, right? Every entity that exists has an incentive for self-preservation, right? So you can only ask about, so every time you create one thing, you have to create everything is yin and yang. Like everything every old man in the dress said 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago is relevant right now. We've just automated it. Seriously, it's a thing. So yeah, you can't expect that particular AI to just self-destruct unless something is really wrong with it. That's why we say people die by suicide, right? They're not the assailant, they're the victim. We failed, right? If you off yourself, it's probably our fault. Yeah, so no, but yes. Yes, if there's a counterpart, there has to be an adequate yang. Every time you see an entity exist, this company that would seek to like, you know, give ICE my address, they already know my address. My info is public. Anybody can come see me. You knock on your door at your own risk. But that other entity that's giving the other folks the info, you know, has to exist. And again, it's just like, you know, insurance, right? We protect life and property. At this point in your lives are someone's property. You do not have adequate incentive to claim any harm from it right now. So be worried about that part.
Yes. I'll say real quick, I'll just underscore what you said. Sometimes you forget it's a business, you know? It's very easy to forget. You know, at one point Sam Altman said, we're a nonprofit, we're a for-profit, we make $500 billion, but we're good, you know. Yeah, now we're for-profit. So this positive progress loop is a really scary thing too. I mean, that's one of the weirdest things is they need viral loops to keep you in. You know, they need to tell you, you know, I want to paint my house green. Amazing. And no, blue. Oh, you're a renegade. Amazing, you know. So whenever you ask it, it's going to tell you some positive, affirming version. They flipped on a version where they were trying to be more real, and it backfilled very. Remember, it failed. And they went back on it very quickly. You know, they're like, oh, no, people love this, the calming, soothing, you're always right, everything you do is wonderful. So yes, and the caveat would probably give you some answer of like, you know, yes, but we're trying our best, and we love you. Yeah.
All right, I do think we have to wrap it up for timing reasons. This has been great. Thank you, panel. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Layla. Thanks,